Next up on my schedule is one of the PAF 509 capstone students, Pam Velasquez. So I'm going to hand it over to her faculty member, Malcolm Goggin. Malcolm can give a brief intro of his course and sort of any words he wants to say about Pam, and then we will play Pam's video.
I am a professor of practice over at the School of Public Affairs, and I am teaching a graduate course, which is the last course that students who are getting a master's in public administration take. It's called the capstone. And every student in that class, and there are 32 students enrolled this semester, every student, unlike many of the projects that are professors and classes that do projects for Project Cities, each of our 32 students does his or her own individual project. So for example, there are two that have done 2 out of 32 who've done a project with the client, the city of Peoria. And we have another 3 or 4 that are doing the city of Clarkdale. Now, what ends up happening in my class is that each student does their own research, writes a draft, gets feedback. At the very end of the semester, they turn in a 25 to 30 page paper, which is what we're going to hear from 2 students today, Jade Bravo and Pamela Velasquez.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pamela Velasquez, and welcome to my presentation. This semester, I collaborated with ASU's Project Cities for my public affairs capstone. My presentation is on the Palo Verde ruin, which is located in northern Peoria. The purpose of my project was to review and analyze a couple of the city's documents, the Historic Preservation Master Plan of 2012 and the Palo Verde Interpretive Plan of 2011. The city of Peoria has acted responsibly by adopting these documents to preserve the city's historical and archaeological sites. Both plans are used as guiding documents for future preservation projects and programs for the city. The challenge of this project essentially forged the research questions. How can the current plans be updated and improved to align with the current social, political, cultural, and economic landscapes in Peoria and peer communities? Number 2, how can the city of Peoria engage residents in the present and future preservation of the Palo Verde ruin? The cultural history of Peoria prides itself in roots stemming from Indigenous peoples. I do want to note that I will be using ancestral Sonoran Desert people instead of the term Hohokam. In my research, I found that archaeologists refer to Hohokam as a distinct culture, not the name of a tribe or people. It is said that the O'odham word Hohokam, which translates to ancestors as well as other meanings, was misheard. Archaeologists use ancestral Sonoran Desert people when referring to the people who created the red on buff pottery and the sophisticated irrigation and canal systems. Several Native American tribes are linked to the ancestral Sonoran Desert people and include Auction Indian Community, Gila River Indian Community, Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, Ta'ana O'odham Nation, the Hopi tribe, as well as the Pueblo of Zuni. With that very brief summary of the Indigenous roots of Peoria, we come to the project subject, which is the Palo Verde ruin. So this area was once the largest prehistoric ancestral Sonoran Desert village along the New River. Around AD 1450, the ancestral Sonoran Desert people mysteriously disappeared from archaeological records. Today, the Palo Verde ruin is city-owned and sits on both the National Register of Historic Places and the Arizona Register of Historic Places. The Palo Verde ruin is encompassed within the Palo Verde Park. It is divided into 4 subsections. Those are the recreational park, there's open space, and there are 2 areas, the modified preserve and the undisturbed preserve. 15 to 17 acres of the park holds the most significant cultural evidence of the ancestral Sonoran Desert people. The methodology of my project took on a qualitative approach. So the main focus was the city document review, the historic master preservation plan, and the Palo Verde interpretive plan. And there was also extensive literature review. The findings of my project, I summarize into 4 common themes, which are disaster planning, social capital, cultural heritage management, and tribal consultation. When it comes to disaster planning, it is rare that conversations with community planners are occurring that incorporate preservation efforts pre and post disaster. Natural hazards such as floods, fire, and storms all pose threats to historic and archaeological sites. Climate change is also driving conversations to help us understand and plan for steady changes in environmental conditions. These sites are important to communities as they preserve a community's power of place and identity. If a community is not prepared to deal with natural hazards, it will be at risk of losing its historical character. I also found that social capital also goes hand in hand with disaster planning. Social capital has a significant positive effect on community resilience. Protecting historic resources from natural hazards is critical for community resilience because it serves as a place of memory and meaning for local residents and may also have economic value as well. Social capital can be built by engaging community members, and that brings diverse perspectives to bring value to preservation efforts. In a way, it helps local residents care about preserving the historical sites and archaeological sites as well. Cultural heritage management is a well-established profession with the goal of maintaining and caring for cultural heritage resources due to their intrinsic cultural value. CHM relates to historic preservation planning because it connects the understanding and preservation of cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible. They are tools for sustainable development and preservation, and both have urban regeneration and tourism components. CHM is an essential role that authorities have as custodians of cultural diversity and how it is used to improve social cohesion. A big part of CHM is connecting with the community so that the locals appreciate and contribute to preservation efforts. My next finding is tribal consultation. So Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act requires tribal consultation in all steps of the preservation process when a federal agency project or effort may affect historic properties that are either located on tribal lands or when any Native American tribe or Native Hawaiian organization attaches religious or cultural significance to the historic property, regardless of the property's location. One such case related to Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act is Medicine Wheel. Medicine Wheel is located in northern Wyoming and received its National Historic Landmark status in 1969. This area has great religious significance to the Northern Plains tribes. In 1988, the U.S. Forest Service aimed to develop Medicine Wheel by promoting tourism. The Forest Service wanted to add additional parking and build a observation deck that was close to the medicine wheel itself. The U.S. Forest Service failed to consult with the Native American tribes that had affiliation to the area, and that caused a long stream of problems. The U.S. Forest Service ignored warnings from the Native American tribes and other advocates, as well as several councils on historic preservations, and tried to proceed with the development. As a result, increased foot traffic caused significant damage to Medicine Wheel. And subsequently, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation issued a notification to the Forest Service that their decision to develop would be considered a violation of Section 106 under the National Historic Preservation Act. So finally, the U.S. Forest Service initiated tribal consultations per Section 106, and negotiations started to occur. Positive results followed, such as the creation of a memorandum of agreement, which allowed for both short-term and long-term management of Medicine Wheel. The first recommendation that I am making to the city of Peoria is to integrate historical preservation planning with disaster planning. The current threats identified in either plan for the city include erosion, vandalism, dumping, and managing access to the ruin due to off-trail travelers. However, natural hazards are not identified, so documenting processes and guidelines related to disaster planning to the preservation planning guides only adds additional protection for the Palo Verde ruin for future generations. These goals can be shared collectively with preservationists, city planners, local, state, and tribal historical preservation officer programs, and emergency management departments. My second recommendation is for the city of Peoria to build their social capital. To enhance the engagement of the residents in preservation efforts, the focus should be targeted at bridging various communities to build their social network. Some of the ways to educate the community about the Palo Verde ruin include hosting social events or interactive games and activities, either in person or online using social media platforms, or hosting focus group meetings. More specifically, I recommend to focus on the Native American historical connection. This can include a workshop or discussion by a historian or elder from one of the identified Native American tribes that have ancestral links to the Sonoran Desert people. Social events can include celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day in October, or at city events, acknowledging the ancestral lands that the city of Peoria inhabits, also known as land acknowledgement. This can help build social capital outside of the local community. The city of Tempe is a peer community that can be contacted for guidance regarding land acknowledgement and or working with affiliated Native American tribes. Tribal consultation is my third recommendation. Chapter 6 of the City of Peoria's Historic Preservation Master Plan states that the city will endeavor to cooperate with all known Indian tribes that may have relationship to an archaeological site. It is not stated in either the Historic Preservation Master Plan or the Palo Verde Interpretive Plan if such consultation has occurred in the past or currently. My recommendation is to initiate tribal consultations and create memorandums of agreements between tribes. A formal process for tribal consultation should be created, implemented, and included in the updates to the City of Peoria's Historic Preservation Master Plan and Palo Verde Interpretive Plan. The City of Tempe is a peer community that can be contacted for guidance on creating a formal process and documenting tribal consultations in city plans. My last recommendations are miscellaneous updates to the current city plans. This includes performing updated historic resource surveys, include GIS resource maps if they were created, and conducting a more extensive review of the city plans to update and revise. I also recommend creating space for the Palo Verde ruin on the city's website. This will provide an educational opportunity not only for locals, but for visitors from across the globe. I also second the recommendation made in the current Palo Verde ruin interpretive plan on page 1 to develop a historic preservation plan specifically to the Palo Verde ruin and park. Lastly, I would caution on using the term Hohokam in the current plans and suggest to start using ancestral Sonoran desert people. This concludes my presentation. I thank you for joining me today, and I will use this time to take any questions. Thank you.